Lucy Letby is accused of the murder of
7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 others.
While she was working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
Letby denies all of the charges over the incident.
Lucy Letby was the only person working on the night shift. It was alleged in court that their mother was apparently told by Miss Letby, "Trust me, I'm a nurse."
This is a podcast about one of the most anticipated criminal trials for years. It involves the most shocking of crimes, the alleged murders and attempted murders of tiny premature babies at the hands of a neonatal nurse whose very job it was to look after them.
Lucy Letby is on trial at Manchester Crown Court, accused of killing 7 children and injuring 10 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital in Cheshire.
In total, there are 22 charges, all of which she denies.
I'm Liz Hull, Northern correspondent for The Mail. I'll be in court to report on the case as it develops.
And I'm Caroline Cheetham, a broadcast journalist. Every week on this podcast, we'll examine what's happened and bring you the details behind the headlines.
This is The Trial of Lucy Letby.
Welcome to episode 3 of The Trial of Lucy Letby, where we get behind the headlines of this case and bring you the detail the jury are hearing in this Manchester court.
The babies in this case are not being named for legal reasons, and the identities of their families are also being protected. They're known only as babies A to Q.
7 of the babies died. 10 survived. The jury are now hearing about each baby in turn. So we're going to focus each episode of this podcast on each baby. What the prosecution say happened to them, when and how.
Welcome to episode 3, Baby A.
Baby A was a boy. He was a twin. He and his sister were born prematurely in June 2015 by caesarean section, around 9 weeks early. Now, this was because their mother was admitted to hospital with high blood pressure. She was a high-risk pregnancy because she had an autoimmune disease which can increase the risk of blood clots. And Liz, baby A, was small, but not a bad weight for a premature baby.
Yes, he was small. He weighed about 3 pounds 12 ounces, which is about 1.6 kilos. He was classed as an intensive care baby, and he was treated in what was called Nursery 1, the intensive care room on the neonatal unit where the sickest babies were being looked after. But soon after he was born, he was breathing on his own, and actually the doctors and nurses considered him to be stable.
OK, so baby A was in Nursery 1. How does it work in the unit? Do all the nurses look after all the babies, or do they have assigned babies to each nurse?
So the way it works is that there are 4 nurseries, the Countess of Chester Hospital's neonatal unit. The sickest babies, requiring the most intensive care, were in Nursery 1, the jury have heard, and there were up to 3 babies in that room at any one time. Guidelines say that babies that sick should really have one-to-one care wherever possible. So baby A was in Nursery 1 and his designated nurse was Lucy Letby. High dependency babies were in cots in Nursery 2. They're supposed to have 2-to-1 care, while nurses looking after special care babies who are less poorly, they were looked after in Nurseries 3 and 4, and they could have up to 4 babies each.
OK, so the prosecution say baby A was doing well in the unit and there were no immediate concerns for him.
Yes, although he was vulnerable because of his prematurity and required intensive care, one expert actually told the jury this week that baby A was doing really, really well. But sadly that didn't last because a few hours later, at 8:20 in the evening on June the 8th, he suddenly stopped breathing. The prosecution say this was because Lucy Letby had injected air into his bloodstream shortly after setting up a glucose drip a few minutes earlier. The jury have been told that she was alone with baby A, having just come on shift. His care had been handed over by the day nurse. Obviously, when a baby stops breathing, staff rush in to help, and the jury heard from Dr. David Harkness, the senior registrar on duty that night. With help from Lucy Letby and 3 other nurses, he gave baby A CPR and tried to resuscitate him. He also called in the consultant on duty, Dr. Ravi Jariam. But after around 40 minutes, they realised baby A could not be saved. The court heard this had a real impact on Dr. Harkness. He said it was one of his first neonatal deaths and he was tearful after the baby died and took time off work.
So I think, Liz, in the minutes after baby A stopped breathing, nurses rushed to get his parents and his grandmother, who were in a different part of the hospital.
Yeah, his parents were watching television in a side room when nurses ran in and said, "You've got to come quick." The parents rushed to nursery 1, and his mother said it felt like hundreds of people were standing over his cot and trying to resuscitate him. The baby boy's grandmother recalled that she knew he was gone as soon as she entered the room. She said, "He was blue." The court was told that his mother was sobbing uncontrollably and begging, "Please don't let my baby die, please don't let my baby die." The parents were eventually told by doctors that their son would have brain damage and further complications if he survived. And the grandmother told her daughter, "You need to let him go." Eventually she relented and simply nodded her head to the medics to stop the chest compressions.
Baby A was pronounced dead at 8:58 that night, and we know that Lucy Letby then took his hand and footprints for the family, as well as a lock of his hair.
Yes, we found this out in court after the jury heard an agreed summary of one of Lucy Letby's police interviews. She told detectives the death of child A was awful and agreed with the interviewing officer that it had been difficult for her, but she said the nursing team had supported each other through it. Lucy Letby said she'd taken hand and footprints of child A following his death, with the parents' consent, and had also taken a lock of his hair. She said she felt it was a nice thing to do, a way of giving the parents memories.
I think in that same interview, Liz, Lucy Letby also told detectives that she knew baby A and his twin sister, baby B, were much wanted babies, and his parents had waited a long time for them. The interviewing officer then asked, "Who told you that?" And she replied, "It was known through the nursing handover we had." She was then asked if that sort of information would change the way she would deal with parents, and she said, "No, I would like to think we treat all the parents the same, but you bear in mind what they've gone through to get to this point." And Liz, it's worth pointing out, I think now, that it was quite unusual after the death of baby A that an immediate post-mortem was ordered because of the mother's pre-existing medical condition.
Yeah, that's right. The jury have heard that doctors were initially concerned that the mother's medical condition may have contributed to his death, and this meant they were worried about his sister, who we know as baby B. But the post-mortem revealed no obvious cause of death, and in fact experts at Alder Hey Hospital, the Specialist Children's Hospital in Liverpool, and at Great Ormond Street in London were consulted, and they all concluded that the mother's blood clotting condition could not be passed on to the babies and was irrelevant to what had happened. So doctors were baffled. And it wasn't just the doctors who were baffled. Baby A's mother said after her son's death that she and her partner had searched for a reason why, but never really got any answers.
An important part of the prosecution's case revolves around an unusual rash or discoloration of the skin that doctors say baby A and other babies that we'll hear about in future episodes developed during their collapses. I think at least 3 of the doctors and nurses present have given evidence that they had never seen this rash before in their careers, haven't they?
Yes, and the rash was the focus of evidence given by Dr. Ravi Jariam. He's the TV doctor that we talked about last week, who some of our listeners might have seen on The One Show or This Morning. He's also one of the most senior children's consultants at the Countess. He told the jury he qualified as a doctor in 1990 and had worked at the Countess since December 2004.
OK, so Dr. Jariam was the consultant on call when baby A collapsed, and he was also there when attempts were being made to resuscitate him. And it also seems likely he'll be called back numerous times in this trial. This week, though, I think he was subject to some intense questioning by Lucy Letby's defence barrister, Ben Myers, wasn't he?
Yes, Mr. Myers wanted to know why, if this purpley pink rash, which Dr. Jariam said was flitting and blushing on baby A's body when he collapsed, was so abnormal and so unusual, had he failed to mention it in the notes he wrote after baby A's death, or in his statement to the coroner and in evidence to the inquest a year later. And Mr. Myers also wanted to know why it was only in his police statement taken more than 2 years after baby A's death. Mr. Myers suggested that Dr. Jariam had been influenced by a research paper that he had looked up at the end of June, weeks after the death of baby A.
So how did Dr. Jariam explain this to the jury?
Well, Dr. Jariam said he didn't realise the clinical significance of the rash until months later, after more babies had died, and it had been present in others who collapsed. He said the research paper, which the jury heard is well known among paediatricians, examined the effect of air embolus, that's air in the circulation of newborns, and it described almost exactly the rash and the skin discoloration that was seen on the body of baby A.
And the prosecution say the air embolus is what killed him.
Yes, their case is that when Lucy Letby took over his care, minutes after she came on duty on June the 8th, she injected air into his bloodstream, something she denies.
So one of the most significant aspects of this week's evidence, Liz, were details that we've heard about Lucy Letby's relationships with her colleagues, and the jury heard about some WhatsApp messages that she was exchanging with other nurses.
5 days after the death of baby A, Lucy Letby and a colleague who were working on a night shift began messaging each other on WhatsApp. In the messages, Lucy Letby said she did not want to be in nursery 3, where the more stable babies were being cared for, and she wanted to be in nursery 1 with the sickest babies who needed intensive care.
So these messages were sent in the evening of June the 13th, that's 5 days after baby A died. Now we're going to hear extracts of those messages. They begin with a message from Lucy Letby's colleague, Jennifer Jones-Key. Actors have voiced them up for us.
You okay? Kiss.
I just keep thinking about Monday. Feel like I need to be in one to overcome it.
You need a full-on break from ICU. You have to let it go or it'll eat you up.
I just feel I need to be in one to get the image out of my head. To be in 3 is eating me up. All I can see is him in 1. It probably sounds odd, but it's how I feel.
It sounds very odd, and I'll be complete opposite.
Well, that's how I feel. You don't expect people to understand, but I know how I feel and how I have dealt with it before. I voiced that, so can't do any more, but people should respect that.
I think they do respect it, but also trying to help you. Why don't you go in 1 for a bit?
Yeah, I have done a couple of meds in 1. I'll be fine. Forget I said anything. I'll be fine. It's part of the job, but just don't feel like there is much team spirit tonight.
Liz, so we've heard a lot about what the prosecution say Lucy Letby did to harm baby A. What do the defence say?
Well, they say Lucy Letby is adamant that she didn't do any harm to baby A and that she was a hard-working nurse dedicated to looking after all the babies in her care. The jury have heard snippets of police interviews where Lucy Letby insisted she had done nothing wrong. She told police the death of baby A was awful and very difficult to deal with. And her defence claimed baby A was a vulnerable baby because of his prematurity, and that he received poor care, or as they put it, suboptimal care, in the unit in the hours before he died, which contributed to his collapse.
Yeah, and I think it's accepted, isn't it, that baby A went without fluids for 4 hours on the day that he died.
Yeah, the jury have heard that the unit was actually quite busy at that time, and that is true. And while it wasn't ideal that he didn't have fluids for that length of time, 2 of the prosecution's expert witnesses have said that this could not account for why he suddenly stopped breathing or why he could not be resuscitated.
Liz, you mentioned there expert witnesses, and I know in this case expert witnesses are going to be a really important part of both the prosecution and the defence case. I think we'll come to the details of the specific expert witnesses shortly, but for listeners who don't ever step foot inside a courtroom, what is an expert witness?
An expert witness is someone with knowledge or expertise in a specific area who the police and prosecutors ask to look into a case and present their opinions on. Essentially, they look into it and decide what they think happened and give evidence about that in court during trials. In this case, the expert witnesses for the prosecution are Dr. Dewey Evans and Dr. Sandy Bowen. They are both consultant paediatricians with around 30 years' experience each. They're going to be really important as this trial progresses. Dr. Evans was the first expert called in by police to look at the medical notes of babies who died or collapsed at the Countess between June 2015 and June 2016. He was asked to try and find an explanation for what was going on. And then once he'd given his reports, his findings were then reviewed by Dr. Bowen. Essentially, she was asked to look into what he had found out and to see whether she agreed with him or not.
And in the case of baby A, their conclusions were that he had been injected with air.
Yes, both Dr. Evans and Dr. Bowen concluded that an air embolus, or air injected into baby A's bloodstream, was responsible for his death. Of course, the defence expert witnesses are likely to have a different view, but we haven't heard from them yet, and we will later on once the defence case gets going.
So that's what the prosecution say happened to baby A in this case, why they say he died at the hands of Lucy Letby, and why the defence say she is innocent of the charges against her.
In the next episode, we'll focus on baby B, the twin sister of baby A, who collapsed just 27 hours after her brother died. Thankfully, she survived. Hope you can join us.
Lucy Letby is accused of the murder of
7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 others.
While she was working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
Letby denies all of the charges over the incidents.
Lucy Letby was the only person working on the night shift. It was alleged in court that their mother was apparently told by Miss Letby, "Trust me, I'm a nurse."
This is a podcast about one of the most anticipated criminal trials for years. It involves the most shocking of crimes, the alleged murders and attempted murders of tiny premature babies at the hands of a neonatal nurse whose very job it was to look after them.
Lucy Letby is on trial at Manchester Crown Court, accused of killing 7 children and injuring 10 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital in Cheshire.
In total, there are 22 charges, all of which she denies.
I'm Liz Hull, Northern correspondent for the Mail. I'll be in court to report on the case as it develops.
And I'm Caroline Cheetham, a broadcast journalist. Every week on this podcast, we'll examine what's happened and bring you the details behind the headlines.
This is The Trial of Lucy Letby.
Welcome to episode 4 of The Trial of Lucy Letby, where we get behind the headlines of this case and bring you the details the jury are hearing in this Manchester court.
The babies in this case are not being named for legal reasons, and the identities of their families are also being protected. They're known only as babies A to Q.
7 of the babies died, 10 survived. The jury are now hearing about each baby in turn. So we're going to focus each episode of this podcast on each baby, what the prosecution say happened to them, when and how. And in each case, we'll explain why the defence say Lucy Letby did not harm or kill any of the babies in her care.
Welcome to episode 4, Baby B.
Baby B was a girl. She was the twin sister of baby A. Like him, she was born 9 weeks early at the Countess of Chester Hospital, weighing 3 pounds and 11 ounces in June 2015.
Baby B was born blue and floppy, and unlike her brother, she had a low heart rate and needed resuscitating at birth, so she was quite poorly. She was placed on a ventilator, but at times she was able to breathe independently. She was cared for in an incubator next to her brother in Nursery 1, which was the intensive care nursery.
We heard in the previous episode that on June the 8th, baby A died, and the prosecution say this was because air was injected into his bloodstream by Lucy Letby, who was his designated nurse. And after the death of their son, his parents became, the court heard, frantic, anxious and extremely upset for their daughter. And Liz, they really didn't want to leave her side.
Yeah, that's right, Caroline. The following day, the twins' parents spent all day with their daughter, having lots of cuddles, and a nurse told the jury that she'd had a good day.
But later that night, the parents were persuaded to go for some rest. And then the unthinkable happened. Baby B collapsed just 27 hours after her brother. What do the prosecution say happened?
The jury heard baby B was in Nursery 1. Lucy Letby was not her designated nurse, but she did help baby B's designated nurse start a bag of feed at 5 past midnight and took her blood gases. 25 minutes later, at around 12:30, baby B's monitor alarm went off, and Lucy Letby went over to her because the designated nurse was preparing medication. Lucy Letby then called for help, saying she's apneic. In other words, she'd stopped breathing.
And Liz, that nurse, who we can't name because her identity is protected, told the court what happened in her own words. She was speaking from behind a screen, and an actor has voiced up her words for us.
Lucy Letby said she's not breathing and asked me to go and help. She suddenly looked very ill. She looked like her brother had done the night before. Pale, white with this purple blotch discoloration. It was all over. That's how her brother appeared too. I just remember thinking, no, not again. I'd not seen anything like that before. To see his sister with the same appearance. Child A's deterioration was very sudden and to an unusual degree. Babies can become poorly very quickly, but there is usually some indication that is happening. We had no undue concerns. To go from that and not responding to resuscitation and looking how he did was very unusual. Baby B was also good throughout the evening, but again she became ill very quickly, deteriorated very quickly. That's why I said, no, not again. You never want any baby to die. You want to help them all go home with their families. That's always been my goal.
And Liz, we also heard the reaction of the parents to the news that their daughter had collapsed so soon after the loss of their son.
Yes, they were understandably anxious for their daughter after their son died, and didn't want to leave her side. Eventually they were persuaded to get some rest, though. The mother said, "The next thing I knew, we were getting woken up by a nurse." And in a statement read to the jury, she said, "My heart sank. Not my baby. Not again."
So Liz, baby B stopped breathing and the doctors and nurses in the hospital rushed in to help.
Yes, we heard that a breathing tube was inserted and baby B started to stabilise quite quickly, within 10 to 15 minutes.
Now, the court also heard from one of the doctors who was called in to help that night. This is Dr. Rachel Lammy, who was a registrar with 6 years training at that point. She gave her evidence to the court and an actor has voiced up her words for us.
The most memorable thing was baby B's colour. She was a very dusky pale grey colour. As we were helping her, she was developing widespread blotches, patches of purpley red colour. They would flush up, last about 10 seconds, then disappear and reappear. They were flitting around her body. You could see them coming and going on her body. Each one lasted about 10 seconds. As she got better, they subsided and went away. She recovered quickly. After 10 minutes, she started wriggling and breathing for herself, but it took about half an hour for the greyness to disappear and pinkness to return.
And Liz, baby B survived.
Yes, she pulled through, but the court heard the mother was frantic. She stayed with her baby all night, describing her as restless, as if she was trying to tell me something was wrong. In the following days, baby B's parents spent every day at their daughter's bedside, and even when they went home to rest, they set alarms through the night so that they could take it in turns to call the hospital every 2 hours to check on her. Her mother told the court, "I was, and I still am, extremely protective of her."
So, just a few hours after the death of her brother, baby B also stopped breathing, and the prosecution say this was the moment Lucy Letby deliberately injected her with air.
Yes, Caroline, the court heard that the collapse of baby B in the early hours of June the 10th was caused by Lucy Letby. The prosecution say she used the same technique she had used with baby A. She injected air into his bloodstream around the time she set up a feed via her intravenous tube.
Lucy Letby denies the attempted murder of baby B, and in fact she denies all the charges in this case. And I think we did hear some cross-examination from her defence team in relation to baby B in the last few days.
Yeah, the defence say Lucy Letby was not responsible and that in fact baby B had received suboptimal or poor care, just like her brother on the unit. Lucy Letby's defence barrister, Ben Myers-Casey, said baby B's case was a good example of the assumption of guilt, and experts had been influenced by the theory of harm because of what had happened to her brother a day earlier.
And the court has also heard from a specialist radiologist who analysed X-rays taken of both baby A and baby B.
Yes, the jury were told that Dr. Owen Arthurs, who is an expert from Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital in London, looked at an X-ray taken after baby A died and saw air in his blood vessels. But no air was seen in baby B's circulation in an X-ray taken about 40 minutes after her collapse. And of course we have already heard from Mr. Myers that Lucy Letby is adamant she didn't cause any harm to any babies in her care. They say the case against her is built on assumption and coincidence.
OK, so Liz, we also got an insight into how one of the other nurses on the ward viewed Lucy Letby. The nurse who we can't name, she told the jury she mentored Lucy Letby when she was a student at Chester Uni and came to the hospital on work placement back in 2010 and 2011.
Yes, this nurse said she became good friends with Lucy Letby, and they often messaged each other about work and their social lives. She agreed with Mr. Myers that her experience of Lucy Letby was that she was highly professional and dedicated to her work.
And I think she also agreed in court that at times the unit was short-staffed and didn't meet the recommended guidelines for the number of nurses to babies.
So neonatal units try to work to guidelines set out by the British Association of Perinatal Medicine. Now, these stipulate, and I think we mentioned this in the last episode, that babies that need intensive care ideally should have one-to-one nursing. Those in high dependency should have 2 nurses for every infant, and nurses looking after special care babies can be responsible for up to 4 children each. At times, the nurse told Lucy Letby's defence lawyer that the Countess was simply unable to meet these requirements, and sometimes the unit was short-staffed.
So Liz, it's been a really busy and quite a tense week in Court 7 at Manchester Crown Court. Now, Kim Pilling is one of the few journalists in the courtroom itself, as most of the reporters, including you, Liz, are viewing proceedings from an annex in another building.
Yeah, that's right, Caroline. That's me. I'm in the other building, but Kim is in the actual courtroom. He's been covering court cases for the best part of 30 years in the Northwest. If anyone's ever read any newspaper reporting of trials in the last 3 decades, the chances are that you will have read some of his stuff before.
Now, Kim supplies, obviously, the Daily Mail and Mail Online and other newspapers and digital websites across the country with information and copy from court cases. He also supplies all the broadcast media as well, radio stations, BBC, Sky, everyone, with the key updates from court cases. And it's Kim who'll be in court every day for the next 6 months. So Liz and I met up at court and we chatted with Kim in the Daily Mail offices just off Deansgate in Manchester, about 5 minutes walk, to get a sense of what it's like watching this trial up close.
Yeah, hello, my name is Kim Pilling. I'm a reporter with the Press Association, and I'm one of the few reporters who are allowed in the courtroom for the trial of Lucy Letby.
Liz is in the annex.
I'm relegated to the annex.
On the telly.
The troublemakers are in the annex.
Just give us a flavour, first of all, of, what's the atmosphere like in there?
It's a busy courtroom. The banks of seats where the lawyers sit is full. That's not always the case. We have teams of 3 barristers for the prosecution and another team of 3 for the defence. And then sat behind those barristers are a couple more solicitors with the Crown Prosecution Service, and then a couple more solicitors for the firm that's acting for Lucy Letby. In front of Lucy Letby, who's in the dock, is an IT guy. This case is quite unique in that a lot of the evidence is being relayed digitally. So each of the jurors, 8 women and 4 men, they have iPads and they're following all the evidence and it's all on their iPads. For instance, in this case, there's a lot of clinical notes that doctors have made. That's quite unique. Obviously a complex case, and I think the amount of files that you would need in this case, it'd be a lot.
We talked a bit last week about the jury. We don't know anything about the jury, and obviously for legal reasons we can't know anything. That's quite right. What do we know? What are we allowed to say about the jury?
Well, there's 8 women and 4 men. They're picked in a ballot. The idea is that they're, a random selection of a normal representation of the general public. I don't think there's anything remarkable about this jury.
Just tell us about the defendant, and has she got any family members with her? How far away are you from her in the courtroom, Kim?
Yeah, she has her mother and father sat in the courtroom in the public gallery to the right of me since day one, and they've been here every day since. And behind me have been family members of the alleged victims. I have a good view of the defendant from the front row. She's just slightly to the left of my vision. She's got a screen in front of her, and as we're going through the evidence, she's getting to see it as well. She's brought to court every day. There hasn't been any noticeable reaction from her during the trial so far that I've noticed. But she is following the case, and occasionally has passed notes to one of the solicitors in front of her, very rarely.
Okay, so we know that the key barristers in the case are Nick Johnson, KC for the prosecution, and Ben Myers, KC for the defence. They've both got a team with them. Just tell us who they are, Kim.
Ben Myers, KC, has 2 junior barristers assisting him, and they are Michael Mayer and Fiona Clancy. And the lead prosecutor is Nick Johnson, KC, and he is being assisted by his junior barristers, Simon Driver and Philip Asbury. In a case like as complex as this, the aim for the jury at the end of the trial, when they go out to deliberate, the aim is that they are experts in the case. So when we get to the very end of this trial and the verdicts come in, a reader who has been following the case, or maybe loosely following the case, they're not scratching their heads as to why the jury has come to that verdict.
Yeah, so Kim, this undoubtedly will be one of the biggest cases that we both cover for our careers, won't it? Whether Lucy Letby is convicted or if she's acquitted, either way, following this for the next 6 months will be one of the biggest things we've probably ever done.
Yeah, I think the allegations and the extent of the investigation, that speaks for itself, doesn't it? I think the number of allegations first. Of course, yeah, it's an high-profile case for a reason. It definitely will be one of the most important court cases that I've covered so far in my career.
Thank you, Kim.
Thanks very much, Kim.
No problem at all.
Next time, we'll be focusing the podcast on Baby C.
Baby C was a tiny baby boy, born early, weighing less than 2 pounds. He was allegedly murdered a week after baby A and a few days after the alleged attack on baby B.
I'll be in court all week. You can follow my daily reports in the Mail and on Mail Plus, and we'll both be back next week with another update. See you then.